Let me also request John Chambers, Mr. Paavan Nanda, co-founder of WinZO Games, and Mr. Bipul Sinha, CEO of Rubrik, and Ms. Shereen Bhan, managing editor of CNBC TV 18, to please join us on stage. And may we have the secretary please join us on stage. Thank you.
I was wondering. I thought you were going to go first. Keynote address. It's one of the fun things about a startup. We kind of roll with the punches.
They don't want the government in there in any hurry.
Oh, yes, we do.
we need the government.
We do.
We don't just want the government, we need the government as well. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Many, many thanks for joining us here on this very special conversation on the US-India Startup Corridor and the opportunities that both sides can benefit from. We've got a thriving startup ecosystem in India, which has changed and evolved over the past 2 decades, both in the depth as well as its width. So I think the last 5 years perhaps have been an inflection point, not just in terms of the number of unicorns that have been minted, but also the reality of Indian startup companies listing on Indian markets and looking at global aspirations as well. We've 2023 and 2024 are proving to be blockbuster years in terms of IPOs in India. And the expectation is that this momentum will continue to gather pace. And there are plenty of opportunities now for startups on both the US and the India side to partner together. I'm not going to give you a long preamble because we have an eminent set of panelists here to take the conversation forward. Without further ado, I'm going to start with John Chambers, who's been the perennial India bull and has been looking at India for over 2 decades now. This is his 50th visit, as he keeps reminding me, to India. And John, one of the things that you did pretty early on was spot the Indian startup opportunity. You've got about 22 companies in your portfolio, companies that you've invested in, and many have their imprint and are embedded in India and India's startup ecosystem. Take me through that.
So basically, as I alluded earlier to the comments about India and the education where we made at Cisco, our second world headquarters here, there were just large tech companies, but there were no startups. And I began to see what the talent was like. And so when Prime Minister Modi came in, he issued in a period of innovation and startups and made a Startup India front and center. To answer Shereen's question very directly, I'm an early stage investor. And yet investing in startups out of the 22, I have 9 unicorns. And with a very modest amount of investing. Out of that 9, not by design, but just because the talent I found, 60% of them are headed by the India diaspora, either directly or indirectly. And all of them have either their primary location in India and their secondary location in the US, or the US and then secondary location in India. The average growth rate is over 50%, so the growth rate has been dramatic. Probably 6 of them are AI companies starting. Now all of them are. 8, 9 of them are cybersecurity. But the model here, I think, is just getting started. And you and I, each time we talk, I don't think we're being aggressive enough on how quickly this is going to change this country. It takes you 10 years to 12 years to become a unicorn, and usually 15 to go IPO. That's when you add the head count. So I'm very optimistic about the job creation that would occur. And as I've always said, Shereen, if you're going to bet on one country, bet on India. If you're going to bet twice, bet on India twice. And I really believe that in terms of the startup. So just getting started, but as you said this morning, it's about execution.
It is about execution, and we'll come to execution in just a second. With Secretary Krishnan, let me address that issue with you. The government has also brought in many changes to facilitate investments into Indian startups, remove some of the long-standing irritants like the angel tax, which has finally been done away with this budget. But, you know, the road ahead now, in terms of building on the momentum that you already have, what are the next steps that you're looking at?
I think fundamentally what happens with startups, and you have to figure out which are the sectors they're going to grow in. And clearly technology is one of the big sectors. And in technology, because it's fundamentally about innovation and it's about bringing in new ways of doing things. It's about ideas fundamentally. And that's why what we can do to enthuse more people to break through into startups in the innovation space is crucial. And that technology could overlay any other sector. It could be service delivery, it could be manufacturing, it could be a range of things. And there we have to operate at 2 or 3 levels. One part of it, I think, which is very interesting, is ways in which we are able to invest with startups, and the scale at which we are able to invest has changed significantly. Under the National Quantum Mission, under the India AI Mission, and also under the India Semiconductor Mission. All 3 are in the space of deep tech. We are talking about governments taking larger and larger bets, and the amount could go as high as 50 crore rupees, and which is pretty big for a startup, because today, you're really scrounging around for 10 lakhs and 20 lakhs, but that's about $1 million rupees and 2 million rupees as grants, and suddenly you're up to about almost 500 million rupees, which the government is prepared to put in either as a grant or as an equity. Increasingly, the thinking also is to move into an equity kind of format. So I think laying bigger bets is one of the key elements. Focusing it in sectors where it can make the crucial difference in innovation space is the second part. Third part is also focusing on ways in which we can actually look to see whether subsequently there could be a large market which government itself can provide in terms of government
as the procurer.
As a procurer of services. And so these are the 3 areas which we need to completely streamline, and I think work on all of these 3 sectors has started, and some of the results are showing through.
You talked about looking at equity financing as well. What do you believe could be the impediments or the deterrents or the challenges when we talk about the government looking at equity financing of startups?
See, I mean, government is an interesting place. You can make a grant of any amount to anybody and write it off, and nobody is going to ask you a question. Because the Constitution says that the government...
I want to be in your business.
I mean, the point here is very simple. The point here is that there is a provision in the Constitution which says that from the budget, whether it is a state government or a central government, you can make a grant in aid. So it's an interesting thing. It is only when you try to buy something that you're tied up in all kinds of knots. If I decide that I want to give somebody some money, and the sovereign authority, which is either the legislature decides, yes, this money is provided in the budget as a grant, and the executive then decides that by a due process that this will be provided as a grant, you can't question it. Even the CNAG cannot question it. I mean, that is the provision.
That's what you hope. That's what you hope.
No. I mean, it's fairly clear. It has to be in pursuance of public policy.
Right.
And there has to be there's a way in which you can actually get that done. On the other hand, if you decide to buy something, whether it is shares or whether it is services, then you have to answer a lot more questions in terms of whether you got the value for money for it, whether you got other aspects, whether that was the most reasonably priced thing, or was there an alternative which you could have bought. All of those questions have to be answered only if you are buying something of value. So that is where the
challenge will lie.
The challenge arises, because how do you then determine that this is the best value that you're getting? So you have to then write up public policy in such a way that for these reasons and for these considerations, we believe that supporting a startup at this stage is a good thing to do. Second thing is we'll have to figure out another way of trying to see whether we can actually support a startup in terms of an equity investment. Because, see, in the old days, a lot of equity investment was made, but all of it was made at face value, right? So it was easy saying you're just buying it at face value. Today you have to buy it at a valuation. And if you're buying it at a valuation in a startup, it's not as part of an IPO, it's not as part of the open process. You're buying it based on somebody's subjective evaluation of what the value is going to be. And that opens up the issue. So one way of trying to do that could eventually be whether you can do it as co-investment. You sort of support somebody else you're investing alongside another venture fund or somebody else saying, at the same valuation that X person is getting it, I will also get it.
I agree.
Yeah.
So that is, you have to find mechanisms of doing it. The reason why it's important is that, it's fiscally also more sound, because what it does is it gives you a reasonable chance of getting back at least some of that money to invest in newer startups. And that, I think, is significant.
Well, I'll come to the three missions that you spoke of in just a second and talk about the execution roadmap. But Bipul, I want to come to you first, because it's been 10 years since you decided to start Rubrik, which is in the space of cybersecurity and cyber resilience. And of course, it took you 10 years to IPO, and congratulations on that. But let's talk about the startup story from North Bihar to IIT Kharagpur to the US to venture capital, and then deciding to start up yourself in 2014.
So we started our business in 2014, and back then the capital was in somewhat abundance, and we took ample advantage of that opportunity to grow the business fast and made a lot of mistakes along the way. But this whole idea of starting a company came because I was in venture capital, and I felt that sitting on the sideline and clapping when entrepreneurs are running, it was not being in the trenches with them. So the idea was that can we create an enduring institution that will last longer than my own professional career? And one of the justification that I gave to myself is that if you ask around who was the funder of Microsoft, nobody would know. But who was the founder of Microsoft, everybody would know. So to really create an impact and create lasting impact was with being a startup. I grew up in India, and just grew up in northern Bihar in 70s and 80s, and just seeing these forums and the energy and excitement in the Indian ecosystem is just unreal for me. Yes. I mean, I could never have thought in my wildest dream that we'll talk about a startup and investment and venture capital, because that was not even in the subject to be studied back then. But coming back to Rubrik, it's been a tremendous experience. We started the business, four of us, all four Indian guys from four different IITs, with one room with a whiteboard where we started the business. In 10 years, we went from four of us to over 3,200 people. Product is in 60 countries. We have operations in 20 countries. We have more than 6,000 customers. We just went public. We did our second quarter earnings. We guided the market to over $1 billion in ARR, which we achieved in 8 years of selling. So a lot has happened, but this whole IPO experience and doing non-deal roadshow, and I was telling Michael about my IPO experience of like doing roadshow and getting money from investors and how they think and what they expect. Yeah, it's been an eye-opening experience for me. And in some ways, startup, you are living in this kind of isolated space and protected environment. And going to public market is really going out there and being exposed. And then you have to show what you're doing every quarter, and showing the number is a new discipline, is a new practice, and we are still learning the ropes.
Yeah, yes, I would imagine that it's in many ways it's starting up all over again with a public market mentality and a public market mindset. But I'll come to the India connection in just a bit, because out of that 3,000 people that you spoke of, about 900 are here in India for you, right?
Absolutely. India for us became a very strategic investment. So we hired one of my batchmates to start India office, and it was experimental in 2017, and he kept hiring people and kept starting like different departments in India. Today, over 900 people in India. We do engineering, product, customer success, customer support, sales, marketing, sales enablement, accounting,
and
finance.
It's not because of cost arbitrage.
No, we are purely for talent. In fact, we say that our Palo Alto engineering team is equal, if not better. Sorry, India engineering team is equal, if not better than our Palo Alto team. So, and also the drive of the team in India and just the bubbling energy is actually making the whole company excited. In fact, 2 years ago, I brought my whole executive team to India. The idea was to get India team excited and show them that we care about you and we are here for you. On our flight back, everybody unanimously said that we came here to inspire India team, and we got inspired by India team. That how much more
how much more can be done?
Exactly.
And I'll come back to how much more can be done. But Paavan, let me come to you. WinZO is in the gaming space, and I don't remember ever a time when we've had the Prime Minister speak about an industry, and he specifically called out the gaming industry twice from the ramparts of the Red Fort in his address to the nation, talking about the opportunities that the gaming industry presents. Let's talk about that. You started in 2018, so really a startup in that sense, and you're looking at servicing the world from India in the gaming arena. Let's talk about that aspiration.
Thank you, Shereen. Firstly, I would like to extend my immense gratitude to USISPF for providing me this space next to such fine dignitaries. Also, Shereen, I'm also completing 10 years of entrepreneurship. You were just discussing backstage.
Yeah.
Back in 2014, when I started my first startup called Zostel from IIM Calcutta with a bunch of my batchmates, Shereen and team covered us at Young Turks.
Yes.
It's been a journey since then. We ran that venture for about 4 years before selling it off and starting WinZO in 2018. It's been an incredible journey. Of course, there are a bunch of macro elements that have come into play in our success. Firstly, there is the triage of smartphone penetration, cheapest data, and UPI. I think that these three trio has really unlocked a macro level opportunity for us. Over and above that, the Startup India initiative from the government has really accelerated the way startup ecosystem is accelerating. I think for us, now we are witnessing true innovation, right? I mean, if you look at 10-minute delivery, this is something that is not happening anywhere. India is the only place where 10-minute delivery is possible. Our own venture, which basically is like a gaming platform, we integrate third-party gaming companies, all sorts of games, and we basically, our expertise is to monetize, a very difficult sector, which is games, by with the help of microtransactions, where you can play a game of chess, carom, by paying as low as 1 rupee, would not have been possible without UPI. UPI is enabling WinZO, and I think if you would have been building WinZO in any other part of the world, it could have been difficult to sort of achieve this kind of business model itself. And of course, it's been a great journey. Of course, for last 6 years, we've been scaling. We've got about 200 million users, millions of microtransactions. India is all about numbers, right? We filed about 20 patents. One out of every 200 UPI transactions that happen in India happens on WinZO. And we are not a payments platform. We are just a gaming product. All of that got a massive boost, when the Honorable Prime Minister himself gave a clarion call this Independence Day, when he said, we all know that India is the biggest consumer of games in the world, but now we want Indians and Indian entrepreneurs to make games for the world. And not just that, by making those games, we need to also push for Indian culture, heritage, folklore, and get those content out there in the world for others to consume, and also get a hint of Indian culture. I think in parallel, we've been building some great initiatives. For example, Bharat Tech Triumph. We have run 3 seasons of Bharat Tech Triumph, as a part of which we basically shortlist the best gaming entrepreneurs in India and make them represent India at GDC in US, or set up India pavilions in all over the world. I think this has come in just at the right time for us in the form of encouragement.
Absolutely, and as I said, you're looking at servicing the world, and that is the aspiration. But Mr. Krishnan, I don't know if the Prime Minister made a call to the Revenue Department or not, as far as the 28% GST on online gaming on real money games is concerned, because that has thrown the industry into a bit of a flux. But on the larger note, I think policy predictability and tax predictability has been an issue, not just for startups, but for the Indian economic landscape for a long time now. And I would imagine that that continues to, in some shape or form, be an irritant that I'm sure the USISPF has brought to your doorstep as well. As you look ahead, what do you believe are the unfinished reform measures that still need to be addressed to provide that facilitative environment?
Reform is an ongoing process. So I think every economy in the world is constantly looking to see what aspect they need to reform. So in India, as in anywhere else in the world, I think reform is an ongoing, unfinished business at all times. There are clearly certain elements that we have to sort of build more efficiency on. Oftentimes, they are more about, certain practices in taxation and certain practices in the way that certain liabilities are determined is much more of an issue than the actual rates of taxation and so on. So those are issues which we constantly take up with the Department of Revenue and the Ministry of Finance with a fair bit of traction. And there is, I think, a general openness to address these issues, and this happens on an ongoing basis. But, this is like a funnel effect. There's a lot of input, a number of issues come in, and it needs to go through a fairly narrow funnel in order to get done. So that sometimes it takes a bit longer than you anticipate, and some of the other reforms require, more significant changes in order to sort of go through the entire process. So that is something which happens. Likewise, in other segments also, sometimes you have to consider a number of factors before you come to a final decision. When you're looking at labor reforms, when you're looking at more flexible working hours, I've been part of efforts where we have tried to actually do it and then had to take a step back for other reasons. So those issues certainly do come up.
Yeah.
And, you have to create the political climate for some of those things to actually go through and get done. And these are, issues which are there everywhere. I mean, in the US, recently last week I was reading Financial Times, front pages, Boeing strike at different facilities.
Yeah.
So labor issues are there everywhere.
Yeah.
It is not just in India. There are issues today as we speak. There are issues in Germany. There are issues in India. There are issues everywhere. These are, ongoing issues of what can be done with labor. And I think labor reform is, again, an ongoing process. As you see more jobs getting created and as you see the greater possibility of employment coming up, you'd also find that the overall labor environment improves and, the mobility automatically improves.
I understand. And,
I think from that perspective, I think, yes, there are some undone things in the labor side. There are some ongoing measures in the taxation side. Clearly, gaming is one of those areas where I think some policy clarity is required, on which work is currently on. So all of these.
If I may just continue on the unfinished reform agenda, as well as some of the specific issues that have arisen over the last few months. For instance, harmonization of standards, and I think that across different sectors is becoming a challenge. That does India really need to have its own set of standards, or should we have harmonization as far as global standards are concerned, so it just makes the ease of doing business easier? Even things like recertification for laptops and so on and so forth, which recent changes that have been brought in by the government. Is that necessarily the best way forward? Because it does tend to not just create dis-ease of doing business, but also seems to suggest that there is a trust deficit.
No, I think, on that aspect, I think there are two or three things which are important. I think what is important is that if we are looking at harmonized standards across the globe, then it's important that India, as a very large market, has a say in the way that the standards are written. And, Indian interests need to be reflected in the way that the standards are written. And as long as that is reflected, then naturally, I think the issue gets resolved to that extent. And we are building capacity to actually do that. So that portion of it is certainly something we are looking at. Now, the other portion, which is about things like, at least I'm not talking about QCOs because there are very few QCOs in the electronic sector. What we have in the electronic sector is primarily CROs, and CROs fundamentally are fairly non-intrusive, but they also ensure that we get in equipment from trusted sources. And today, I think, especially in electronics and telecom, getting in stuff from trusted sources is important across the world for like-minded countries. It's as important for India as it is for the US, and I think all of us are trying to find ways of ensuring that what we get into the country and what gets used in the country is from a trusted and safe source.
Yeah, John, you wanted to make a point.
Yeah, I think we're missing a little bit. We're in silos when we talk about issues, when in fact what India has done so well on is you've broken down the silos. You have venture capitalists, Indian diaspora, but also large operations here in India that are driving it. You have people who've done multiple startups who are driving it. You have a prime minister that lights up the country talking about innovation and how we're going to lead. You have government leaders who are taking risk way ahead of their counterparts around the world and willing to try some different things. You saw from the earlier panel the importance of education, training young people for where their jobs will be. It is that combination that makes this go. You have to do it with a vision of where you want to go, and then you've got to break it through, including startups, learning from failure, and having an environment where you go back and try again. Then we attract more FDI investment, we attract more VCs. That's what's going to make this country so great. And I want to thank the government leadership in particular, and also re-educate us all. Each of the leaders I've ever talked to in government here want to know what's working well, and then they stop me about 5 minutes into it. What do we have to do better? And they take action. That doesn't exist hardly in any other country in the world.
Well, that's good to hear. And talking about FDI, and the aspiration and the target is to move to $100 billion. And the hope is that the US will be one of the big drivers as far as that FDI is concerned. But John, you've always been good at inflection points in the market and spotting and identifying inflection points in the market. As we look at what's happening in the world today, especially on AI and what AI is potentially going to do, the kind of disruption it's going to bring about, but also the opportunities it throws up, specifically for a country like India, and for startups in India, how would you, what would your thoughts be on that?
Well, my view on AI is much like my view on India. If you're going to have a foundation technology, it ought to start with AI. Your second pick ought to be AI, and your third pick ought to be AI. It would transform every business in ways we're just beginning to understand. In coding, 48% of the companies in America now view it as very important that they use AI for coding. In terms of customer support, it is at the very forefront. So I'd like to see, talking about government involvement, a sovereign fund for AI alone, and think about how do you drive it through. I would strongly encourage each of your companies to say how you're going to use AI, whether the big companies or smaller companies. I don't invest in a company unless they use AI. It doesn't matter if it's gaming, it doesn't matter if it's enterprise or consumer side of the house. So I think we've got to re-look at that as a foundation point. India could lead the world in terms of AI, and I would argue, as we talked earlier, if done right with the US, we can move each other very rapidly. So I would say 1, 2, and 3. It's AI, and AI, and all of us ought to focus on it. I bet you 10 years from now, we're going to look back and say that was an understatement.
That was an understatement, and India is going to lead in an AI era. Bipul.
John was talking about a very interesting point, AI, and all of us in this room is thinking about AI, and how should we think about AI, how should we apply AI. So let me give you a framework that at least we tried. So when the AI started, I called the first few engineers and first few product managers of Rubrik into a room and asked them 3 questions, and that turned out to be very pertinent 3 questions. Number 1, can AI kill our business? So all of us in this room has to think about, can AI and AI-induced technology kill your business? So if you survive and if you decide that it's not going to kill your business, then second question you have to ask is, what more products I can sell to my customers? And what net new value I can drive using AI? So that's the second question. And then the third question is that, how do I do more with less using AI? How do I reduce cost, create efficiency, drive more things, accelerate my roadmap, accelerate my customer satisfaction? And so that's the three-legged stool framework. Can it kill us? If we survive, can we sell more? And if we can sell more, can we sell more at low cost?
Yeah, well, I would imagine that that's the framework that many CEOs are attempting to answer at this point in time. And Mr. Krishnan, you know, on the US-India partnership, and as we've heard through the course of the day, it's being called the most defining partnership of this century, specifically as far as technology is concerned, on things like AI, on things like quantum. What do you see as the path forward? Because we've already got the ISAT in place. On the defense side, we've just concluded the SOSA. You know, what do you see on the technology side as being the next steps that both sides need to take to encourage co-creation and collaboration?
I think there's a lot of scope for more work, including in the semiconductor space, critically, within the ISET framework, and also in the artificial intelligence space. And some of it is also related in terms of, you know, both of them need specific kinds of chips. And there, I think there's a huge potential to actually go forward. The point that John was just making about there being a sovereign fund to help AI grow in India, that is what the India AI mission does. Yeah. And we put down about $1.25 billion, a quarter of $1.25 billion worth of money, government money, to actually push this. And a significant part of that is actually pushing access to AI compute. And that comes from advanced technology, and that comes from the kind of chips that currently are being designed in the United States. And we should see more of that sort of collaboration to take it forward in the next 4 to 5 years. I think that is one critical space which we believe is going to be significant and important. It found space in the recent statement which was released after the Prime Minister Modi met President Biden in Washington in the US. This was an important element of what was discussed in terms of in the semiconductor space, what is it that India and the US can do together? And there again, you know, bringing it back to startups, I think a very significant part of work that can actually happen is in semiconductor design, which is where we are trying to help startups too. And that innovation can lay the foundation. If there's a way that we can figure out how to share the value of that IP for work which is done in India on behalf of American companies, that could be a significant way forward as well in terms of how we can actually co-create, collaborate, and take this forward and really make it a defining relationship of the century.
You know, you talked about that semiconductor announcement that President Biden and Prime Minister Modi made, Mr. Krishnan. What should we expect now as the next steps of moving towards operationalizing this first joint fab?
That, of course, I mean, quite honestly, that is a niche fab. It is intended for a very specific purpose, but the applications tomorrow can be more wide in terms of power electronics, and that could be really significant. You know, power electronics, including both silicon carbide and gallium nitride, can make a significant difference in the way things work, and we have very high expectations of that. And you know, that has implications for electric vehicles, that has implications for green energy. So it can really, in that sense, the two areas which really matter, you know, a digital transformation and an energy transformation, and with innovation going alongside. That's where I think the real hope lies.
Yeah. Paavan, you know, you spoke about something interesting, which is the structural changes that have happened, or the shifts that have taken place over the last few years that have enabled things like microtransactions, courtesy UPI, and so on and so forth. Aadhaar has also made onboarding customers a lot easier, and so on and so forth. As you look out, you know, 5 years on, what are you now observing or focusing on as key trends that you intend to capitalize on as you look at making in India for the world?
So absolutely, there is one important trend that India is right now sitting on a massive tech dividend for last 35 years because post the IT revolution. There has been different generations, right? There was a generation where we were massive IT exporters. Then came a point somewhere around 2000s when our technology was built to cater to local demands. All these startups like Flipkart, Make My Trip, Book My Show, they sort of got developed to cater to local demands. But now, for last 3 to 4 years, we are seeing that Indian entrepreneurs are fully ready to make products that will not only be working well in the Indian market, but will be export ready, world-class products, right? And there are a bunch of factors which are leading to it. We have got more than 1 billion consumers. There is such a diverse land, like there's no country as diverse as India, different languages, different user preferences, smartphones, again, low latency, really cheap smartphones. If your product works well, it works on anything else at all, right? For us, for example, when we started 6 years back, we were never thinking of going global, but after building it for about 200 million users in India, solving for 12 different languages, plugging in 100 plus games in a single app, we realized that what we have built is truly unique, and this is something which is export ready. As a result of which, last year we went live in Brazil. We already have 5 million users, and what it does is when a company goes global, for example us, those 100 companies that work with us, whose games are plugged on our platform, are also exporting their product. There are the 75,000 influencers who work with us are also now exporting their content internationally. And more such companies are going to now be, especially in software. Software as a field, I think, knows no barriers. Cross-border trades are much easier. I think you will see a lot more export-centric theme there. I think that is one. The other thing that we are seeing is, of course, over the next couple of years, which is already clear that one, Indian talent and the kind of products we are building are next to nothing. Secondly, there is a great domestic demand. As a result of which, right now we are attracting great investor interest from all over the world. I mean, we have, like John said, that we need to raise $100 billion every year. I mean, the Indian IPO markets are an example of that. I'll give you an example of a company in my sector, Nazara. Right? Nazara is the only listed gaming company. Nazara trades at the highest P/E multiple across any gaming company in the world, right? That's what the power of Indian markets is. And I can tell you that there are about $20 billion worth of private market valuations ready to go public again. Yes, like we discussed, about regulatory certainty and all of that. And once all of that will get unlocked, I'm sure, that 20 billion will come out to be 50 to $100 billion in enterprise value. And all that capital, when investors will make, will get redeployed into the entire startup ecosystem because it's a common investor base. So I think these are some of the themes that at least we are looking at from our vantage point.
Bipul, you said the job of the CEO is to actually look for niches that don't currently exist. So which are the niches that you're looking at? And really, on the India-US partnership, and specifically from a startup point of view, this transition from to a product nation, how significant a shift is that?
I mean, the time for India has come. If you think about the 20, 30 years of managing IT of Fortune 500 companies out of India, Indian techies know inside out of how businesses are run, how businesses software should run, or supported and enabled and operationalized, and now layer in AI. So this know-how of how businesses software run, and now AI creates an door for disruption, and all the workflows that existed now can be done with AI automatically. This is a very potent combination of know-how plus AI. So it is possible for, at least for where I stand, it feels like the next 10 to 20 years, the whole bunch of B2B companies coming out of India that will sell the business products around the world, AI enabled. And that would create such a massive dividend for India because it is independent of Indian consumer, and there is an opportunity for Indian consumer. But as well, but we are talking about this as a trillions of dollars of opportunity, because all of the enabling, like software enablement, operationalizing, day-to-day management will be fully automated and delivered out of India.
Mr. Krishnan, as we talk about unlocking this immense opportunity as well as the large headroom for growth that everyone here is talking about, as the next steps on your to-do list to really unlock this opportunity and value, Mr. Krishnan, what are you focused on?
I think there are two parts to this. One part to this is, of course, in terms of making sure that India actually becomes a location where a lot of the design takes place. That's how you become a product nation, the word that you used. And so designing products and using India's talent to actually design is something which is very important. We need to design for the world as much as we need to do other things. But equally, we also need, alongside that, a lot of people to be in jobs and in good quality, high quality jobs. And there, I think working for the rest of the world is also equally important. I mean, whether we are doing GCCs, whether we are doing engineering R&D centers, whether we are doing actually extensive electronic manufacture, all of those become important. So India, the size of India, you need all of it. And
Yes,
not
we
just-
need more than one solution, and we need all of these solutions to work in parallel. John Chambers, I'll give you the final word on this. Are you writing out checks on this visit specifically?
Yes, I'm available after hours. We'll get a glass of wine and we'll talk through each of them. But what you're seeing now is a nation that's learned to dream. And I'm going to push this really hard. Our dreams are now too small. Shimon Peres out of Israel, Startup Nation, he said there's no room in this world for small dreams. Secondly, you've learned to work together better than any other country in the world. And now we're going to see speed of change, and we didn't go through it. But a startup today, to hit a unicorn status, will do it in 18 months with AI and other technology. If we really begin to say, if we're going to move at this speed, what is government going to do differently? What are the IITs going to do with 1.2 million students? How are we going to encourage the end-to-end businesses to accept new technology quickly? Use Tata as an example. Yeah, and what Chandra's doing there, it's all AI across all of the various industries. So I'm going to say we have to dream, but I'd like to see us develop a playbook that combines these and then run it at a faster and faster pace. I'd like for a third of that playbook to be a very tight relationship with America if we do it right. You saw this a long time ago, I think even before I did. We need people to make it really exciting about what we could do together.
Well, we've been trying to make it exciting for the last 22 years on our show that focuses on startups. But many, many thanks, John Chambers, Mr. Krishnan, Paavan and Bipul for joining us this afternoon on what looks very promising as the next big opportunity, the US-India Startup Corridor. Plenty to work with at this moment, but plenty of excitement and enthusiasm on what the road ahead looks like. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're amazing.